Like many of us who've flown into San Francisco and Oakland, you may have wondered about those bright red and green ponds you see below that line the South Bay from the San Mateo Bridge all the way to San Jose. Well, did you know that ponds like these not only grow salt, they also provide a sanctuary for 1 million shorebirds. And today, you and I own them. Hello, I'm Doug McConnell, and I've explored many of the Bay Area's most beautiful locations. But until recently, nobody, not even this backroads traveler, has had a chance to walk on this piece of the South Bay shoreline. That all changed a few years ago when a small group of government officials and environmental leaders quietly began talks with the private landowner Cargill. Their goal? To acquire 16,500 acres in the heart of the Bay Area, a property that's been called the Hope Diamond of wetland restoration. Today, the State Department of Fish and Game and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, in conjunction with the State Coastal Conservancy, are transforming these lands, roughly the size of Manhattan Island, into the largest wetland restoration project on the West Coast. This is the story of how it all began. It wasn't easy. Physical changes to the land required careful engineering plans. Approvals were needed from dozens of government agencies and special districts that provide water, power, and flood protection for millions of people. And with the Bay Area's growing population and economy, land costs climbed beyond the reach of the state and federal wildlife agencies. But thanks to unprecedented leadership, dedication, public support, and private generosity, a sanctuary for hundreds of species of wildlife will be expanded and preserved. Streams and shoreline will be open to the public for the first time in 100 years, and the Bay's tidal wetlands will double in size. Thanks also to the work of hundreds of scientists, activists, and average citizens, the renaissance of San Francisco Bay has truly begun.
Our reaction when we first heard about this was total disbelief and exhilaration if this was really an opportunity, if this was really a possibility to be able to acquire those properties. It would have been very special. It was something that we were very interested over a long period of time.
I came to the Bay Area at a time when we were used to the salt flats, just being there. But the opportunity to restore some of the wetlands is just enormously exciting for somebody who never lived here when the wetlands existed.
The National Audubon Society had a handful of ecosystem projects that they considered to be top priorities, and San Francisco Bay was definitely one of the top priorities for the organization at a national level, in addition to the Upper Mississippi River and the Everglades.
Well, I think since the beginning days of the National Wildlife Refuge here in San Francisco, everybody always wanted to make it just a little bit larger and a little bit bigger. So we've had an interest in those salt ponds since the beginning of the National Wildlife Refuge here.
This was a very unique transaction in the fact that we did get the various agencies, Fish and Wildlife Service, the Coastal Conservancy, the California Wildlife Conservation Board, Department of Fish and Game, private nonprofit, the foundations, the Hewlett, Moore, and Packard Foundations, and the Goldman Fund. Everybody wouldn't have come together as players like this. We wouldn't be here today.
Cargill has a 5-year planning process, and one of the things that became apparent was we likely had excess property, excess land for our business in the Bay Area. And someone mentioned it may be of interest to the state or to the federal government and to the people of the state of California if that property were turned back into wetlands at some point. And we thought this might be a unique opportunity, but we had no idea how to go about doing it, so we started asking questions.
I think there were two parties responsible for making this happen. Senator Feinstein was the person who had the passion and the vision for making this happen. And I think Cargill played a major role. This would not have happened without their being a very willing and generous partner in this enterprise.
Doing anything in the San Francisco Bay Area is tough duty. There's so many different groups, and it's very difficult to get them to coalesce over a common cause. But if there was ever a common cause about which groups should coalesce, it's this one. Because no one can say that restoring wetlands is a bad thing.
Quite frankly, I kind of threw the staff out the first time they came in and proposed that I thought the project was too big, too complicated. Our staff, people at Cargill, people in the state fish and game organizations kept coming forward. They just wouldn't give up, quite frankly. And we kept looking for solutions out there, trying to find functional solutions that would make this project work.
One morning I got a phone call and my assistant came in and said, Senator Feinstein is on the phone for you, would like to talk to you.
So I picked up the phone and I called Warren Staley, who was CEO of the company, and I said, Mr. Staley, would you be willing to take less than $300 million? And he said, I might. What did you have in mind? And I said, something like a third the price.
I wanted to do it, but I needed to go back and talk to my senior management team, the people in the salt business, and most importantly, the board of directors, to have a discussion, if you will, on why we might do this.
He came back and he said, yes, we would accept that. And then he appointed Bill Britt, who was a vice president of the company, to work with us. And I thought, how can we get the rest of the money?
It was going to be difficult because it was going to be state money, a little bit of federal money, and a number of foundations who were very interested in this were going to have to come up with the money. It was a very large sum to be undertaken for that kind of a project.
Helping acquire lands is something that had not been part of our environment program's mandate, and in fact it's not something we have done ever since. We thought of this as a special opportunity and something that was too good to pass by.
The acquisition was so big, it couldn't be taken by one agency. So it was shared. Department of Fish and Game, a California agency, got part of it. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife got another part of it. It was essential that there be some overall comprehensive planning. So a third agency, the State Coastal Conservancy, came in to do the oversight. We regulate it. There's another agency. The Water Quality Control Board, a fourth agency. All of the local governments around it. It's American democracy on the ground.
Throughout this process, Senator Feinstein was a real critical ingredient. When things started slowing down, things bogged down at the table, Senator Feinstein was there to bring things back together. Without her leadership, I'm not so sure we would be here today either.
One of the things that was very important about this land acquisition, when you think about lands that could be purchased in the bay and former wetlands that we wanted to acquire, many of them are now parking lots or housing developments. And what Cargill left were salt ponds, which were basically the lands with some levees, some small levees around them. They were not laser leveled like many of the farmlands in the Central Valley. They still had all the channels in them and all the topography that was in the original salt marshes, which makes it much easier to restore.
We knew flood control was going to be a critical issue from day one because we know that Cargill salt ponds currently have a significant impact on how flood waters move in the bay. So we knew that hand in hand with the restoration project, we needed to have a careful assessment of flood control. And then to the extent sea level rise comes to the table, we need to make sure that anything that we do associated with affecting flood levels assesses and takes into account sea level rise.
My job is, in essence, to bring together all of the different parties, the government agencies, the regulators, the public, the scientists, the technical consultants, and come up with the best plan that we can for the salt ponds, for the acquisition area.
We want to bring back as much of the Bay Area wetlands as we practicably can, because that's essentially the resource that has been lost with a lot of the development around the bay. However, also we've created habitats for migratory birds with the creation of the salt ponds, and we have to recognize that the birds now depend on that habitat, and so finding the right balance between migratory bird habitat in the ponds versus the fish and mammal habitat that we can create with the wetlands is a very, very tough technical challenge that's requiring careful analysis.
The trick is that nature doesn't necessarily cooperate. The birds read different textbooks than we did. They are going to use the habitat as they choose to. So our whole plan really is aimed at slowly changing the landscape over time, converting some ponds to tidal areas, doing experiments in other ponds, seeing how the birds react, and then going back and making more changes so that hopefully we'll get the best balance of habitats in about 50 years that we can create in this beautiful area.
Well, I've been in the natural resource business for 33 years now. This is one of the best examples of collaboration I've ever seen. The leadership from Cargill, the leadership from the environmental groups, the communities that live along the bay here, and all the different agencies. We found something that's good government, but it's also very good for the people of San Francisco.
When people have protected Yosemite in the past and protected all these important things, you really have to thank them for thinking about that years ago before anyone else has done that. And I'm hoping that people who follow us in the future will look back and say, boy, was that a great idea. I'm so glad they did this because we're enjoying it now.
When everything's said and done, this is the largest wetlands restoration I know in the history of California, and it may rank way up there in the history of the United States. So it really is a stellar project. And I am just so happy that all these groups have come together and that everybody is working from the same point of view to try to see that it's done right.
We're now celebrating the 5th anniversary of the property transfer. Bay waters flowing into more than 10,000 acres, 500 acres have been restored. Now, scientists and engineers are busily engaged in transforming the land, opening recreational trails, and enhancing wildlife habitat. Now, thanks to California's environmental leadership, public support, and private generosity, San Francisco Bay's environmental renaissance has truly begun.